Hello again, it's a book review time, and this week we're getting to know Ruth Khama. Your People Will Be My People is one of the greatest love stories ever told. This is the story Ruth Khama shared with journalist and author Sue Grant Marshall. She courageously married Botswana's first president, Seretse Khama, sparking uproar in the country. Readers get a glimpse into her life in the book. Sue Grant Marshall is in studio with me this morning to tell us more of the book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, do. Thanks for inviting me.
Your people will be my people. If you've seen the movie as well, yes. You just can't help but fall in love with this couple. Let's start with how this came about in terms of penning this book.
Penning the book. Yes. Oh boy, is that a story? You've read the book. I can tell. It took 35 years to get it published. It didn't take that long to write it.
Yeah.
I started doing it literally 35 years ago. I was born and brought up in Botswana, initially in a little village called, well, it's a big village, it's the biggest in Botswana, called Seretse. And that's the seat of the Bamangwato tribe, and that's where Seretse Khama lived his young life before going to England, etc., etc. Okay, I don't know how much I must skip over to answer that question. I've been known to forget the question.
Right. So, just in terms of this coming about, I mean, you had a relationship with her. What kind of a person was she? I mean, we read about this larger-than-life character, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the love that she had for her man.
Okay, so I knew her well because I used to go and stay on her farm, in the Khama farm outside Gaborone, which Gaborone, my father actually was in charge of building. It was just a little village, and then it was turned into the capital. And then she used to come and stay with us. So in the beginning, what I met was, when I was a journalist on the Argus and then on the Star, I went to interview her, having known her, and my family having known her since I was literally a baby. And I was nervous of her because she was this, huge world stage personality. Yeah. She was an extraordinarily strong woman. In the war in Britain, totally British, she grew up in the heart of London. She was part of the WAAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. She used to drive the fighter pilots around, and she was extraordinarily brave and strong. She and Seretse thought deeply about getting married. Should they, shouldn't they? He understood the implications in terms of his tribe, and she understood the implications of her family, because her father, she had no idea. He'd lived in India. He was actually racist. And she and her sister Muriel had no idea how racist their father was.
Sure.
And so when Ruth went one evening to tell him about Seretse and that she had decided they were engaged, that she was going to marry him, and her father said, I will have nothing more to do with you. The day you marry that man is the day you never darken our doorstep again. And they were a close-knit family. And she clung to her desire, her marriage, that she was going to go ahead with it.
Yeah.
And so what I met was a very strong woman, obviously, and then as we grew closer and closer together, I discovered what a sense of humour she had, what a tart, wry wit she had.
Wow.
Yes. And
there sounds like is it Corinthians 14 that talks about how patient love is, and all the lovely things about love. But like you mentioned, she was a fighter, and she fought for her love. Why?
Because, people used to say to her, and there's still people in England, a friend of mine's mother, who's in her 80s, when my friend said, Mum, Sue Grant Marshall's writing a story on Ruth Khama, and she said, oh, that woman, she let the side down by marrying, a black man.
Right.
What was the question again?
No, you did declare, but why did she fight for her love?
Because, people used to say to her, why did you marry a black man? And she said, I didn't marry a black man. I married the man I love.
Sure.
And, words like that, so strong.
Yeah.
always so steadfast. And you know, when they got to what was then Bechuanaland Protectorate, the world press were literally following them everywhere by planes, small planes. They were hounded. She was also hounded in London. Seretse came back to Botswana, to the village, to tell his tribe about Ruth and to ask them please to accept her. While she was on her own, well, her sister Muriel was always with her, and her mother would sneak out of the house and meet her against her father's wishes. Yes. Then she was in the little flat that she and Seretse had. She heard a noise at the window one evening, and she drew back the curtains. It was dark, and there was a light bulb in her face. A pressman had got a ladder, climbed up, yes, and then as she opened the curtains, boom, bang, there went the flash bulb. And it was that kind of harassment. They used to creep up the stairs to her flat at the top, and she'd been, you know, in the Air Force. She had Air Force pajamas. They found, you know, they were that intrusive that there she was, and they said, "Oh, you're sleeping with someone else. You're in another man's pajamas. We're going to tell Seretse."
I want to talk about him as well, because he loved her incredibly. So he put a lot also on the line. These two sacrificed so much to be together. What was his fascination with his woman?
Ruth could dance, ballroom dancing. She came second in a ballroom dancing competition. She wasn't expecting to dance. She hadn't been practicing for a competition, and so the story's in the book. And she loved ice skating. She loved horse riding. She was witty, and they didn't like each other when they first met each other, because their friends had told them, "Oh, you must meet Seretse," and told him, "You must meet this Ruth Khama with her sort of auburn hair, and she's so vivacious," and she was witty. And they fell in love.
Sure.
And he was not prepared to give her up. And the church, the British state, the South African government, because here, D.F. Milan, 1948, which is the year in which they got married, that was the year apartheid came into South Africa in such draconian force. And D.F. Milan and the National Party did not want a mixed-race couple on their border, and they did not want a chief like Seretse. He looked like a chief. He had the manner. He came from a long line of chiefs. They didn't want this powerful Bamangwato chief designate, because his father had died, his parents, when he was 4 years old, and so there had to be a regent, and that was his uncle, Tsekedi, stepped in and was acting for this 4-year-old boy. And yes, he was a chief. He had a chiefly bearing. But you know what I loved most about Seretse?
Right.
His sense of humour and that intelligence. He went, like so many leaders in Africa at that time, he went to Fort Hare with, you know, the presidents of Tanzania. They all became presidents later on. And his intellect and his knowledge, but that impish sense of humour. He was always playing jokes on people. And
what a time to have been alive in the presence of such great leaders of the continent.
Yes.
What did you learn from their love and about love in observing their life?
That steadfastness, that they had, well, as you know, they had the most incredible challenges. I mean, being told by the tribe initially, "We don't want a white woman, she must go." And then the tribe actually was tired of, they were tired of Tsekedi, the regent. He was a good man in that he was very forward-thinking. He built schools and, colleges and clinics and all the rest of it. But he was very, very autocratic. He flogged a white man. Now, remember the times we're talking about, but that was even back in the 1930s, Phineas Mackintosh. And there's a whole book about Phineas Mackintosh, flogged by a chief, but a black man,
right.
And the British sent a naval detachment up from the Cape to punish this chief who dared to flog a white man in his khotla.
Sure.
And so that's the kind of background, and it was against such a powerful, determined uncle and regent that Seretse had to fight his cause. But, you know, he never did it in a bombastic manner. He was always quiet, firm, kept to the point, unlike me, and
we love you nonetheless. And, sorry, finish your thought,
so that is those were the qualities which I think, Ruth, you know, during the war, all these fighter pilots, they were young, they were dynamic, they were dashing, they were all a young woman back then might desire. And she said, because she'd seen her next door neighbour, a young man her age, killed. They were sitting talking to each other, and the German planes came over, dropped a bomb, and he was killed and the house was flattened. And she decided then, I am not easily going to give my heart to anyone in a time of war like this when people are killed. And so she was a very determined person that she was going to marry someone she loved and respected and had the kind of bearing, you know, and integrity. You know, you just had to meet Seretse.
Sure.
I danced with him at the Independence Ball.
Ooh, how tall was he? Was he tall? Was he? What was his stature like? Or was he?
No, he was tall. He was tall. And while he had, you know, you walk into, you know how people walk into a room and they have a kind of a bearing, and you know immediately. She knew when she first went to that missionaries' dance in the middle of London that her sister had organised. Her sister was a missionary at that time. And when Seretse walked into the room, she knew here was a man, here was a leader, here was someone you could respect and admire. But they disliked each other, so they ignored each other initially.
Oh, but isn't that one of like the greatest things ever? That unassuming, didn't even expect it kind of love, and look what it produced. Thank you, Sue, for telling the story. It's such a yummy, yummy story. Your people will be my people, the Ruth Khama story. Sue Grant Marshall, a pleasure.